And with me today, I welcome Todd Goodwin, one of the nation's most respected hypnotists and a board certified fellow of the National Guild of Hypnotists, an honor held by fewer than just 1 in 500 professionals. With over 15 years of experience, Todd has helped thousands break free from trauma, anxiety, fears, and self-sabotaging patterns through neuroscience-backed hypnosis and NLP. Todd's unique approach bypasses willpower and traditional talk therapy by targeting the root of emotional pain in the subconscious. He and his wife Gina run Goodwin Hypnosis, where they offer transformative sessions. And in this episode, Todd challenges conventional views on healing and trauma, explores how we unknowingly stay stuck, and reveals what it really takes to unlearn fear and suffering. So welcome to the show, Todd. Such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you, Anu. Likewise.
Amazing. So Todd, if you could just explain a bit about yourself and what first drew you to the field of hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming.
Well, I had my own personal dark night of the soul, I guess you could say, when I was 20, my junior year at university, and I was, overwhelmed, anxious, low self-esteem, worrying constantly, depressed, crying at least once a week, usually to my mom, on the phone. And, I had been eating garbage and gained like 20 or 30 pounds in a short amount of time. And even was, almost suicidal in terms of thinking about it. So what was interesting though, is looking back, I don't really think my life was that bad. I mean, it wasn't great, but compared to what it could have been, it was really in my own mind that it was so awful. And through a series of helpful interventions by friends and books that I read and starting to eat healthier, and ultimately taking responsibility for my own thoughts and my own situation was really, really helpful for me to help turn that around. Now, if I had known my future self then, my 20 years future self or 30-year future self at this point, because it's been 31 years, it would have been a lot faster. But I was able to, lose the extra weight, improve my grades, improve my social life, my health got better, my mood improved, and I did like a complete 180. And then I said, okay, well, I want to help other people do this, because if I was a total disaster, and I could turn that around, then what if I get professional training? And then you think, well, that's where I became a hypnotist. No, I thought I'll do it by becoming a nutritionist, because eating healthier was a big part of what changed things for me. And so I went and got my master's degree in nutrition. And unfortunately, after 2.5 years of taking those classes and learning how to work with people with weight issues primarily, no one ever said to me that you're going to give people great advice, you're going to give people great counsel, but most people aren't really going to change. They'll do it for a couple weeks, then some excuse will come up, they'll get overwhelmed, and they'll start eating garbage again and gain weight. No one ever said that. So I, thought, wow, this is great. I'm going to heal the world, one person at a time through all this. And, wouldn't you know it, it was short-lived, the success, the effectiveness. So I was very discouraged and disillusioned really by the whole experience. So anyway, I got out of that field, and worked in consumer market research for several years. And then, but I felt like helping businesses make money just for business sake was I was leaving behind something that was really meaningful to me, which was, health and wellness and helping people change their life like I had changed mine, fortunately, with the help of other people and things like that. So I'd been reading, Anu, about how if we know what to do, if our doctor, nutritionist, personal trainer, acupuncturist, chiropractor, psychotherapist says, don't do this, do that, why don't we do it? Like, why You're right. I mean, so most health and wellness fields work under the assumption that people are rational, which we're not, and that people will can effectively use willpower, which they cannot, to change habits, habitual emotional responses, habitual behaviors, habitual thought patterns. And so most of the healthcare, health and wellness business, all the professions really deal with using logic and using willpower and self control, which is great in an ideal world, which we don't live in. And so people end up frustrated. And everything I read said the subconscious mind is where the problem is. That's why people have, unwanted habits. That's why they are anxious. That's why they self sabotage, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, so everything I read about how do you adjust that is hypnosis and NLP are two of the most effective ways to change the subconscious program. If your mind is a computer, the subconscious is where all the programs are stored. And if you can effectively upgrade that information at the subconscious level, then change happens much more easily and naturally than it would through a lot of work and effort and long drawn out analysis. So I basically found some hypnotists who were teaching people how to do this. I took some courses, I read a lot, I did some workshops, I found a mentor, became certified, and then in 2007 opened my practice in Miami Beach and grew and developed from there.
Amazing.
And that's the short story. That's a short version. I haven't come up with a shorter one than that. But
no, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Amazing, amazing. And so, one of your core messages is about the danger of identifying with your trauma. So, can you explain what that actually means and why is it harmful?
yeah, so I think in general, more broadly, identifying with whatever your problem is, whether it's a trauma, whether it's a diagnosed disorder, whether it is a health condition or an addiction, and there's more than just those, is that if we identify with something that we don't find particularly healthy or empowering or helpful in our life, and those things that I just mentioned are not, then that keeps us stuck in a number of ways potentially, because our identity will dictate our behavior and a lot of things leading up to that. So if someone identifies, for example, and they say, I'm an alcoholic, that directly changes their self-image from someone who has a behavioral problem, which is rooted in an emotional problem and a thinking problem. That's how I look at it. And then they say, this is who I am. I'm an addict. And what do alcoholics or addicts do? They misuse substances, they get stuck, they sabotage, they harm themselves and other people. So identity affects self-image, it affects our beliefs. Because again, using that example, if someone says, I'm an alcoholic, then what belief comes from that? Well, I'm going to relapse constantly. I'm going to struggle. I have to avoid triggers. I can't go hang out with people who drink. Those are all not actually true. But if someone believes they're true, they'll be true for that individual because that's going to affect their emotional state. So identity affects self-image, beliefs, thought processes, decisions, feelings, and then ultimately behavior. So if you identify with something that is disempowering, like someone is a trauma survivor or a trauma victim, then that's going to reinforce an external locus of control, which, for those who don't know, is a belief that we live at the effect of things in our life and we have very little agency or ability to direct ourselves. So internal locus of control means I believe that I can significantly influence what happens in my life. I can't control the world, but I can change things because the control is within me. An external locus of control is that basically I'm living at the effect of all the other things that happen in the world. The first, being internal, is very empowering. External is disempowering. So someone who has identified themselves as a victim of trauma or addiction or the obesity gene or whatever it might be, they can even develop a victim mentality, which reinforces the disempowered label. Because if someone identifies as a victim, by definition, they basically are on the receiving end of things, and they really don't have the ability to change themselves. So the problem is society in general reinforces this victim perpetrator false dichotomy, and that if someone identifies, and of course the 12-step program reinforces what I believe is an unhealthy identification with the problem. And there's a lot of this people cancer survival, and they make that about their whole life. Is that becomes a big theme. A lot of the recovery field in addiction recovery, I've met a lot of operators, founders, CEOs, owners of those facilities, and a lot of them are in recovery, never recovered, oddly, but in recovery, even if they haven't used or whatever it is for years or longer. And they overcame their problem, and then they made their whole life about it. I can understand that being helpful if it's truly inspiring to them, but surely there must be other things that are meaningful to the person other than building their entire life and purpose around their problem. So all of that is a very long way of saying identifying with your problem can create new problems and make it harder to evolve out of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was that clear?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I guess the whole kind of purpose of that is to separate your identity from any experiences of abuse or trauma that you may have endured, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
how can people go about that?
Well, I think one is an understanding. It starts with a conscious understanding, but that by itself is not transformative. But there needs to be a subconscious acceptance of the reality that that things happen in life that don't necessarily mean anything. If someone is abused, let's say, or if someone is neglected, abandoned, whatever might be, or experiences some later in life traumatic experience, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Some people say, "Well, my dad left me when I was a child, or left my family.
Yeah.
That must mean I wasn't worthy of love. I wasn't good enough for him." Maybe that's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And because we, by nature, are driven to find meaning in things,
Yeah.
and we ask questions constantly. So this can be very useful, right? But it can also be harmful, and it happens automatically. So if something happens, positive or negative, based on our judgment, we often try to draw some conclusion as to what that means. Usually that's incorrect. So if someone believes that they're a bad person because something happened, or because they struggle with a problem that makes them weak, it makes them stupid, self-destructive, lazy, whatever it is, I'm a bad person. Well, that's just going to harm self-worth even more. And then that's going to increase the likelihood of them having anxiety or other, emotional challenges. So the first thing is really to, and this is a lot actually what I do through hypnosis, is help shift someone's beliefs about themselves first and foremost, so that they can detach their or disidentify with what's happening around them. So they don't actually, they're kind of like you've heard it said, you're in the world, but you're not of it.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, I'm living in the world, I'm interacting with other people, but I'm not the center of the universe. And so what happened does not necessarily indicate anything about who I am. Sometimes shit just happens. I mean, quite honestly, you need to be able to move on. And the problem is with our subconscious drawing these conclusions, a lot of which were informed by things we learned growing up, a lot of disempowering mental programs, that makes it hard for us to actually free ourselves from that, from those negative experiences.
Yeah. No, I really agree with that. And so you've also said that too much emotional support can keep people stuck. That's a bold claim. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And this is also a problem that is starts with good intentions, including by the therapy model, but can, taken to extremes, be actually very harmful and disabling. So if you think of a support group, and I have plenty of examples from past clients in various ways where this was the case, but if someone gets a lot of attention or support or sympathy or comfort, or broadly speaking, if the person is rewarded for having their problem, then we like to be rewarded. We don't think of it that way. But if something unfortunate, difficult, harmful, painful happens, and suddenly we start getting a lot of comfort, a lot of social support, a lot of, people take it easy on us, we start noticing subconsciously, oh, wow, it's kind of nice. I kind of don't feel as much pressure, or life's a little easier for me, especially given how horrible that thing was. And then it can become an emotional dependency on that source of support. There are a lot of people who are in grief support groups, trauma support groups, divorce support groups for addiction, 12-step program, chief among them. And for all the benefits these different groups do, and often the benefit is initially. So a little bit of support is definitely helpful, but a lot is not. Over the long term, people become addicted essentially to that source of support. And there's a fear, again, this is not intentional, but it's subconscious, that if I get better, whatever that means, if I'm no longer grieving, if I'm back on my feet, if I'm dating and I'm not mourning the death of my partner or my divorce, if I'm no longer struggling with my substance issue, whatever, then I lose my social support. People will say, "Oh, he's doing fine. He doesn't need us to coddle him or comfort him anymore."
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel like they may not even be aware of this, but they might feel like they're going to lose something that was really, quote, good, that came as a result of something, quote, bad. And I'm putting it in quotes because these are all just subjective judgments. They're not actually objectively true. So if we feel like something bad happened and then we feel like we really deserve something good to compensate for it, we may not be so willing to let that go. And that's one reason why some people remain depressed, in chronic pain, grieving, addicted for decades, because of something that you probably know is called secondary gain, which is where you get a benefit for a problem you have. And then your subconscious says, well, actually, I kind of like that benefit. And even though someone really tries to change, they try to get rid of their grief, they try to overcome their depression, they try to break their addiction. And they say, I don't want to be in a support group forever. I don't want to be in talk therapy forever. And yet that's conscious intention. But the subconscious says, if I let that go, I lose this benefit. And quite honestly, I may not feel like I'm able to handle the new challenges that come from graduating from this experience. So I'll just sort of stay in my discomfort zone, basically. And this is a big reason why people relapse. It's a big reason why people find codependent relationships or have trouble getting out of them. And so it becomes basically an emotionally compulsive habit. It's a big problem, and a lot of the time people don't really talk about it. They just encourage more support.
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree. And again, so what would be the better way of helping people?
Well, one is to figure out what is the benefit, specifically, what is the benefit that you're getting from keeping your problem? For example, with effective methods, grief, trauma, most addictions, compulsive habits more broadly, can be overcome in a fairly short amount of time. So there's no universal law. There's no law of the mind that says someone who struggles with these issues must continue for, years or decades or however long or forever. That's not true at all. We learned to be traumatized. We learned to be anxious. We learned to be grieving. We can unlearn it because they're just based on perceptions and beliefs and the conditioning of the nervous system. Those can all be relearned or unlearned, or as I like to say, dehypnotized. So we can break out of that trance that keeps us stuck. If you can identify specifically how you're benefiting from keeping your problem, despite your best efforts, despite your best intentions, then you can do a couple things. One, you can potentially find alternative ways to get that benefit. Like it could be as simple as saying, okay, I'm getting a lot of attention from people for having my problem, and it feels good. The first is to be mature enough and self-aware enough to actually admit that, because there's no fault involved. This is just, okay, that's what your mind chose to latch onto. You say, okay, I'm getting a lot of sympathy, I'm getting a lot of attention. It feels like love, which is really what's most validating. And you say, that's my benefit. And so what are some alternative ways that I could meet that need, which we all have on some level, but in a way that doesn't require me to still have my problem? In other words, if someone has built a social network at a 12-step program or in a grief support group, what are some things that person might have learned, or what are the things that person might enjoy in terms of interactions, communication? Maybe there's a lot of activities they do with those people outside of just a group. Well, that's great. How could you do some of those same things with other people that are not basically bonding through trauma or through misfortune? And so if you can find alternative ways to meet the same need, then by definition, you're no longer dependent on that one way to get your needs met. Kind of like with smoking cigarettes, for example. If someone uses cigarettes or alcohol to relax, to blow off steam, to connect with other people who do the same thing, to distract from discomfort and many other, benefits the person gets, then if they can identify what those benefits are and they can find a whole bunch of alternative ways that are healthier, then they're not going to fear losing that behavior or that substance. But if that's the sole source of their relaxation, their connection, their distraction, their whatever it might be, then they're sure as hell going to be anxious when they try to stop doing that, because their subconscious mind says, wait, hold on. We need this because we need this for X, Y, and Z reasons. And so taking that away creates fear, because it's forcing someone to break a dependency. And so all the work that I do is not about forcing. It's actually about giving people more options, more choices. And when they have more choices, they usually will make the ones that are healthier for them. But if they don't have more choices, they stick to the one that they adopted unconsciously.
Interesting. Thank you for explaining that. Really, really interesting.
And there's one other maybe less gentle way of doing it. And it's to figure out the benefit you're getting from, if there's a secondary gain, from the problem state, and then somehow invalidate that benefit or have it removed. So this is not usually how I do things, but this would be how someone who's not seeing me to get help in this area, they might say, okay, they might tell if they have this moment of clarity, they might say to their family or to their friends or coworkers, I don't want you to give me any more attention or sympathy or comfort. I don't want you to ask me about how I'm doing post grief, post trauma, post whatever. I don't want any positive reinforcement associated with this situation. So if the person stops getting a benefit for having the problem, the subconscious eventually says, oh, well, this strategy of staying stuck isn't really working because I'm not getting rewarded.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think those are fantastic ways. So ultimately, we're trying to get away from the sympathy-seeking behaviors and to more kind of support, and also to obviously offer them more constructive support, rather than sympathy. I love that.
It's something that's empowering and that doesn't disable someone. Something that gives people agency and allows them to grow through a challenging experience instead of letting that define them and pretty much direct their life.
Absolutely. Thank you. So
Mhm.
what role, just moving on to the rewiring the mind for recovery, like what role does the subconscious mind actually play in healing emotional trauma?
I would say it plays almost the entire role,
Mm,
um, because trauma is a subconscious phenomenon. As I see it, and I'm not alone in this. Authors like Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk, and a lot of people who have studied trauma and all of these different things at a very deep level and somewhat unconventional way, although I happen to agree with most of their findings, is that um, it's not the experience that happened. Let's just say something we perceive as traumatic.
mm,
It's not what happened that traumatizes us, but the way we remember it, the meaning we've given to it, again, unconsciously, the beliefs that we've established about ourselves and the world around us.
mm,
And then all of that creates an emotional and behavioral response. For example, if someone was abused, mistreated, abandoned, neglected by someone important in their life, they could establish the belief, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not good enough, because if I were worthy of love, if I were lovable, if I were good enough, smart enough, good looking enough, whatever enough, then that wouldn't happen to me, which is not necessarily true, but that's the conclusion that people tend to draw from the experience. They might also develop the belief that says I'm not safe, which is a prime cause of anxiety and overwhelm. Just that belief alone can do it. So that's all subconscious. So if someone has a belief that says I'm not safe, for example, or I'm not worthy of love, coming from, supported by a memory. This is key. Supported by a very emotionally upsetting memory of an experience, then that memory provides proof for why that incorrect belief is correct. It's not, but the memory is proof. It's evidence that the subconscious points to. And that belief, which is disempowering, creates shame, anxiety. It can create depression. And then the subconscious says, okay, I'm feeling really bad. How can I feel better? Well, let's see. There's a lot of options. I can eat, drink, smoke, gamble, use porn, social media, use violence, anger. Those are all great temporary solutions, but they don't change anything. And this is where people get into these unhealthy patterns habitually. So that's all subconsciously driven. And the memory part is really important, because the memories of the traumatic experience are the keystone that holds it all together. And obviously, yes, someone experiences trauma, they often have a dysregulated nervous system, so they might find it much easier to go into a fight or flight response than to be relaxed. That can be reconditioned
mm,
through a variety of means. But the memories, this is important, is that people think, well, that happened to me. I'm never going to get over it because I remember what happened. It was awful. I can picture it. When every time I picture it, I feel, really upset and angry and sad and scared.
mm,
And that is a classic traumatic memory. But that can actually be very easily changed through a process called memory reconsolidation, which is a natural, safe, automatic process in the brain that happens every day, where we think of something that happened, the memory becomes changeable, basically, and then after a few minutes, it goes back into long-term storage. Sometimes takes a little longer. So we can, and this happens throughout life automatically, but we can intentionally bring up those memories. We can make certain changes to them so that the memory is not as threatening and does not arouse all of these negative emotional responses. And once that happens, and the memory is restored in that changed manner, then from that point on, I mean, I'm oversimplifying here, but from that point on, when the person thinks of that experience, or that memory, it usually doesn't bother them. So this isn't about repressing anything. This isn't about, erasing your mind or memories, because the person still knows exactly what happened. It just doesn't bother them viscerally. And that's due to the brain basically rewiring itself essentially. So how the memory is stored directly affects how it relates to thoughts and feelings. So by changing that, which is a big part of the trauma work that, my wife Gina and I do with clients, it makes it much easier to change the limiting beliefs like I'm not safe, I'm not worthy. And then when those thoughts are changed, then the emotional responses change from overwhelm, anxiety, guilt, grief, resentment to more balance, calm, confidence, self-worth, and so on.
Beautiful.
So it sounds like rocket science, but it's not. It's neuroscience, but it's something that's been established and proven. And I've been doing it with clients for most of my 18-year career. It's actually kind of fun, and people don't have to get into their story and talk about their experience at length. Sometimes just a couple words, thinking about it for a minute, is enough. And very often within minutes, person's either totally neutral, laughing about it, or just feeling, minimally just uncomfortable. And usually even that goes to neutral. And from that point on, it typically sticks in that changed state. It's pretty amazing, really. It's fun too.
Yeah. And I guess that's how hypnosis differs from therapy, right? So.
Yeah, because the thing is, a lot of our problems are narratives or stories that we tell ourselves. And so if we're constantly retelling the same story, we're just reinforcing the same grooves in our brain, basically. We're reinforcing the same pattern. If you keep retelling the same story, you're not going to get any different result. The other problem with conscious level talk therapy, and talk therapy is very useful for a lot of people. Usually, though, I find that it's helpful mostly in the short run initially. And you get to a point where you have the self-awareness and you have the understanding of how things are connected, where at that point you're just sort of kind of circling the airport trying to land, but you can't land because you're just replaying the same story and the same conversation. And it's at a conscious level. Because the trauma and the emotional issues and the habits are all subconscious, talking about it like we're doing right now, using analysis and logic and understanding, does not change what's beneath the surface. It's important, but it's just the first step. So by focusing on the root cause of the issues, not the symptoms themselves, but what's causing the emotional and behavioral symptoms, and doing that at a subconscious level through NLP, through hypnosis, through the memory reconsolidation techniques, those changes can happen usually fairly quickly, and they typically last, potentially forever, because you're basically unlearning something that you learned. And if you've unlearned it, why would it come back?
Yeah. Fully agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And so you've worked with thousands of clients. Can you share a powerful transformation story that still inspires you today?
Yeah. So I actually, I just worked in a few months ago with someone who is a 30-something-year-old guy who had he was diagnosed with functional neurological disorder, which used to be known as conversion disorder, which is basically where repressed emotions or trauma create physical symptoms. Like for him, he had pressure feeling in his head, seizures, lost limb paralysis, as well as the emotional issues like anxiety and depression and all of this. So that's a little more extreme than most of the clients that we see. But he had tried, you name it, he had tried it, and he still had that issue. So we worked together over the course of about 2 months or so, but fairly quickly, fairly early on, a couple sessions in, working by Zoom, he released a lot of this repressed trauma that he had had for decades, and a lot of repressed emotion, fear, anger, things like that. And the physical symptoms started to go away. By the time we were done, he said it was 90 to 95% gone. And rather than thinking that he didn't want to be alive anymore, he was and isolating himself. He was socializing with his friends again. He was looking forward to a future. So that was one of those things where repressed emotions, which a lot of us have, but unresolved trauma actually created a physical illness, basically.
Oh.
Most of the time, it doesn't go that far, but some of the authors that I mentioned, a lot of them, and there's a lot of evidence that shows that chronic illness can be traced to unresolved trauma and repressed emotion. It's just it doesn't happen very quickly. It may happen over decades.
Mhm.
So if someone wants to reduce the likelihood that they're going to get cancer or an autoimmune condition or a chronic degenerative illness in their later part of their life, they'd be wise to not only eat healthier and take care of their physical health, but also specifically go and resolve the whatever trauma they have been holding on to. It's not their fault. No one's fault for being traumatized. It's just how our mind deals with it. But we can undo that, and by doing that, it frees up. It frees us up to heal ourselves and to be our best self.
Yeah.
So that's just one recent example.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, for listeners who feel like they've tried everything to heal, what makes your method different?
Well, one, if it's a trauma, let's say, and that's our specialty, but not everyone we work with has experienced certainly not a major trauma. Most people have minor little t traumas. That's just part of life.
Mm.
But what makes what we do different is, first, it's not based on telling the story. It's not based on talking about what happened on that fateful night or what happened when you were a child, all those times when whatever it was happened. It's not, people don't need to talk about that. They already know what's going on. We don't need the details. Not that we don't care, but it doesn't really help the process. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. They've talked about it in therapy. They've talked about it to their friends. Maybe they're ashamed to talk about it, and so they haven't talked about it. That's okay. They don't have to. The other is that usually what we do, because we're dealing at the subconscious level with the issue, it's much easier and requires a lot less effort and work and less time too, than using willpower or analyzing it and talking about it forever. So if someone wants a safe, natural, usually relatively easy compared to the alternatives, and reasonably brief kind of intervention to clear these things, then the approach we use, I believe, is great. All of the alternatives have their place. So I'm not saying people should see us to the exclusion of whatever else they're doing. It's simply an alternative that a lot of people have not considered. And the other thing is, I would say, Anu, that what we do is we both Gina and I use a lot of humor in our work.
Mm.
So it's regardless of how serious the issue is, how it affects someone, whether it's a trauma, whether it's social anxiety, fear of public speaking, low self-confidence, struggling with eating habits, grief, whatever. Most of those are not, fun, happy topics, right?
Mm.
But yet humor used in the right way at the right time can be amazingly powerful to change the association that people have with those issues. And when it's done, again, at a subconscious level, then the meaning changes, the associations change, the feelings change, and the weight usually lifts off pretty quickly.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Sounds very powerful. And but what I love is, what you said, that you don't have to just keep dwelling on the past. Just it's all about just rephrasing the past, and to actually focus more on how to now move on from that, and to obviously live a more fulfilling life. So yeah, I really love what the work that you're doing. But what
Can I, oh,
advice? Oh,
can
yeah.
I, sorry, I just want to, can I interrupt you real quick? There's something that anyone can do, and it may seem to some counterintuitive or objectionable, but given what I've been saying, you would expect no different from, I'm not going to toe the common company line here.
Yeah.
A simple thing anyone can do is to look back at what they would think is a misfortune or a bad experience, whatever it is. It doesn't matter in any part of their life, whatever it was, and ask, what did I gain from that?
Yeah.
How did it serve me? That simple question can help to balance out the judgments that we typically make. Because if we think something was bad, understandably, and we regret it, we resent it, we feel guilty about it, sad about it, because it was just, broadly speaking, a bad experience, then that means we're going to fear that happening in the future. And that creates fear. And then we get stuck with all of these emotions because we're never living in the present. So if someone can say, okay, how did it serve me? How can I benefit? How did I benefit from that? And start keep adding to that list until when you think about it, it doesn't seem so bad. That alone can, is that going to completely resolve the issue? Probably not, but it will lighten it quite a bit and can give someone a little bit of freedom and the flexibility to realize that when we don't think in black and white and we think a little more flexibly, we can really change how we feel and how we respond to things.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to someone who's still living with the effects of childhood trauma, but is afraid to revisit the past?
Well, okay, strictly speaking, you can't revisit the past because the past doesn't exist.
Mhm.
What exists is our memory or memories of the past, and memories by their nature are not completely accurate. In fact, the memory reconsolidation phenomenon proves this. So we don't, like the game of telephone. I know we live in across the pond from each other, but did you ever play a game called telephone as a kid?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're sitting in a circle, there's like 10, 12 kids, and there's a message, and whispering in the ear to the person next to you, and they keep whispering it, the same message, supposedly, and it comes back around to you a few minutes later.
Yeah.
Most of the time that message is different, and it could be really different, which makes it kind of fun and funny. But that's how our memories work. So when we remember something, we're not remembering the event, we're remembering the last version. Like on your computer, you're saving a file. It's not the same file it was when you first started writing or creating that document. It's the last saved version. And this happens unintentionally, automatically. So we're not revisiting the past because it can't be done. We're revisiting the last version of a memory, of a memory, of a memory, of a memory, of an event.
Yeah.
So right there, that says what you're remembering is not accurate entirely. It has changed, which proves you can change how you remember and think of something. So people don't have to even necessarily revisit their memory of the past. For very long. For maybe when we do that kind of work with people, the memory reconsolidation, like the trauma clearing, it's usually a few minutes, sometimes only 1 minute, the person's thinking about it, which they've done 1,000 times before. Yeah. They think about it, they feel it, they're picturing it in their mind, and then we go about and change that in a way where they don't lose any knowledge of what happens, but the emotional charge goes away. So that's the best thing I could say. If someone does not want to even think about what happened in the past, which they're kind of already doing unconsciously by themselves, but if a person doesn't even want to even address it with a professional, then I would say, then you're going to be stuck with it. So there has to be some willingness to face the issue, but it's not done in a way that requires long exposure to the traumatizing event or memory. It's usually fairly quickly, minimally uncomfortable, and then after that, that goes away. So, that's what I would say. You can't run from it, because if you run from something, eventually it's going to catch you, and you're always running. But if you turn and face it, you realize that it's not as big of a monster as you thought it was, and usually goes away, quickly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
Where can my listeners find you?
Well, our website is www.goodwinhypnosis.com. And we actually have a like a 1 minute questionnaire, which has 8 really quick questions. Literally, will take 1 minute. That will help you. If you visit that link, goodwinhypnosis.com/survey, it will help you determine if you're a good fit for the kind of work we do. Obviously, when we work with people, we do a more detailed intake than that, but that's a quick 60-second sense of if you're probably a good candidate or not based on those questions. And you can put in your email address, and if you mention victim to Victor, then we'll send you a really relaxing self-hypnosis audio for stress reduction and relaxation, and a educational video that we called the 17 facts you need to know about yourself before seeing a hypnotist or therapist. And it'll teach you a lot of concepts, including some of the ones that you and I talked about today. And we also have periodically we do educational live Q&A by Zoom. So people have questions, like they've heard this conversation and they wonder about this or that. So we do these periodically, and we'll let you know when our next one is. So there's no obligation or pressure with any of this. It's just, an opportunity to benefit from it. So it's just goodwinhypnosis.com/survey, and, make sure to mention victim to Victor.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been such a
Absolutely.
pleasure having you on. Really, really appreciate all your amazing insights and the value that you've provided today. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Well, thank you for the questions.
yeah, it's been fantastic.
I talk for a living, so it's nice to be able to explain something, helpful, and that's why I enjoy these kind of conversations. Hopefully, it inspires your listeners to move beyond whatever state they're in if they're stuck. So
yeah, absolutely. And anybody who has any questions, please do reach out to Todd. I'm sure he would be honored to hear from you, and it's always great to hear from everyone. And if you do want to get in touch with myself about anything, then please do reach out to me as well. And again, thank you so much for today, Todd. You've been absolutely amazing.
thank you, Anu.
And I will be sharing all your links in this episode for everyone. So that's all we have time for today, my lovely people. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next show. Stay blessed.